One of the most important figures in modern gospel music is Kirk Franklin, who was born in Fort Worth, Texas, on January 26, 1970. His creative fusion of pop, hip-hop, R&B, and gospel has not only revolutionized the genre, but also made it more widely accessible. Franklin's unshakable faith and musical genius enabled him to become a gospel superstar, garnering him 19 Grammy Awards and leaving a lasting legacy despite a difficult upbringing filled with personal hardships and abandonment. He was raised by his aunt. Franklin's journey from a troubled youth to a renowned performer is a monument to tenacity, atonement, and the transformational power of music, thanks to Gertrude, who fostered his early musical skills. Franklin's life, his revolutionary contributions to gospel music, and the emotional struggles that influenced his extraordinary career are all examined in this study. Early in life, Kirk Franklin faced many hardships. He was born in Fort Worth, Texas, and was taken in by his Aunt Gertrude when his biological parents abandoned him. Deep emotional wounds were caused by this early rejection, which led to sentiments of desertion that would affect Franklin's music and life. Despite these obstacles, Gertrude saw his artistic promise and gave him a supportive atmosphere in which to develop. Franklin began training himself to play the piano at the age of 4, exhibiting his musical talent. By the age of 11, he was directing church choirs, a remarkable accomplishment that hinted to his future as a musical pioneer due to his innate talent. Franklin's early years were not without upheaval, either. When he was a teenager, he disobeyed the rules of his religious upbringing by using drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes. A learning disability that prevented him from finishing high school added to these difficulties and further distanced him from society's expectations. The death of a close friend in a bizarre shooting accident when Franklin was 15 was a devastating tragedy that rocked him to his core and forced him to reevaluate the course of his life. His sense of loneliness was further exacerbated by the personal responsibility and criticism he received from his religious group after becoming a father at the age of 17. However, these early struggles would later form the emotional foundation of Franklin's music, giving it a genuine and relatable feel. For both Franklin and gospel music in general, his foray into the music business was a watershed moment. He founded the gospel choir Kirk Franklin and the Family in 1992, which would serve as the platform for his innovative style. Kirk Franklin and the Family, their 1993 debut album, was a huge hit and went platinum. At the time, it was a unique achievement in gospel music because of their moving lyrics and creative fusion of classic gospel music with modern sounds. Songs like Why We Sing and Silver and Gold struck a chord with listeners. Franklin's ability to bridge the gap between religious and secular music was demonstrated by this album. His status as a musical pioneer was further cemented by later albums like Watan 1996 and the New Nation Project 1998. Stomp, a crossover success from the latter album that combined hip-hop and gospel, became a cultural phenomenon that reached audiences outside of churches. Franklin's ability to incorporate pop, hip-hop, and R&B elements into gospel music expanded the genre's appeal and made it more approachable for younger listeners. His partnerships with well-known musicians like Bono, Mary J. Blige, and Kanye West proved his adaptability and impact, demonstrating that gospel could be heard in a variety of musical genres. With albums like Father's Day 2023 demonstrating his development both personally and artistically, Franklin's discography kept evolving. This project, which was accompanied by a documentary, examined issues of faith, family, and reconciliation, mirroring Franklin's continuous quest for self-awareness. Beyond his recordings, he has made significant contributions to the music industry. Franklin, a national trustee of the Recording Academy, has been instrumental in influencing the course of the music business and promoting the position of gospel music on the international scene. His 19 Grammys and many other honors highlight his lasting influence and capacity to engage audiences throughout. There is no way to quantify Kirk Franklin's impact on gospel music. He has broadened the genre's appeal and made it relevant to a variety of listeners by fusing traditional gospel with modern genres. His songs resonate with listeners of all backgrounds and faiths because they touch on common themes of adversity, faith, and victory. Franklin has become an accessible character because of his openness to share his own struggles, whether they be addiction, family conflict, or abandonment. This has encouraged millions of people to face their own struggles with bravery and faith. The number first. The trauma Kirk Franklin experienced as a child, a voyage through hardship and desertion. The primary cause of Kirk Franklin's childhood trauma was his birth parents' desertion. Franklin was born into a world without parents and was raised by his Aunt Gertrude, who took him in and gave him a secure, caring childhood. The loss of his parents left a deep gap, even with her protective presence. Franklin has frequently discussed his intense feelings of rejection and inadequacy, sensations that continued even in the security of his aunt's house. This early abandonment left him with a persistent sense of being unloved, which would influence his emotional terrain and eventually reverberate in the honest, sincere lyrics of his songs. Franklin's experience of abandonment as a child in Fort Worth, Texas, was not only a personal hardship, it was a defining feature of his worldview. Because of the emotional distance caused by the absence of his original parents, he began to doubt his value and position in the world. The sorrow of rejection was not entirely alleviated by Gertrude's attempts to nurture his musical abilities, which were demonstrated by his self-taught piano abilities and his leadership of church choirs. By the age of 11, during Franklin's adolescence, this trauma showed up as rebellion, with his internal conflict being reflected in his drug, alcohol, and smoking habits. He eventually used his music as a way to connect with people who had gone through similar things and heal from the recurrent theme of feeling unwelcome in his life. The emotional burden of desertion was exacerbated by Franklin's battle with a learning disability, which had a major influence on his academic career. Although Franklin's disorder specifics are not well known, he has admitted that it significantly hinders his capacity to absorb and remember knowledge in conventional educational environments. School became a battlefield for him because of this cognitive barrier, where he was always frustrated and felt inadequate. Franklin's struggles probably remained unrecognized in a time when learning impairments were not as well understood and were frequently stigmatized, which further distanced him from his peers and strengthened his feelings of inferiority. Franklin's failure to finish high school, a setback that signaled a low point in his early life, was the climax of his childhood struggles. Franklin struggled with a learning disability and the psychological effects of being abandoned, making it more and more challenging to succeed in school. His defiance of authority figures and social norms had grown stronger by the time he was a teenager, and he stopped attending formal schooling completely. His high school dropout was a result of his emotional and cognitive problems, which added up to more than just academic failure. Although Franklin had a traumatic upbringing, it was also the furnace that shaped his fortitude. The difficulties of a learning condition, his parents' desertion, and his failure to finish high school could have completely destroyed his life. However, Franklin's musical ability and faith served as a lifeline. His early musical talents were fostered, and he was given a feeling of purpose by his Aunt Gertrude's continuous support. By the age of 11, Franklin was in charge of church choirs, which helped him develop his abilities and find a sense of belonging. Adoption, cognitive difficulties, and academic problems were all woven into the traumatizing fabric of Kirk Franklin's early years. He suffered the burden of rejection after being abandoned by his birth parents. His learning disability made scholastic achievement elusive and contributed to his failure to finish high school, despite the supportive home his Aunt Gertrude provided. However, Franklin was not defined by his struggles. Rather, they helped him become a resilient musician whose songs have impacted millions of people. In addition to overcoming his early trauma, Franklin has inspired others by turning his suffering into stirring gospel hymns. His transformation from a disturbed young man to a gospel music legend highlights the ability of faith, music, and fortitude to triumph over even the most severe hardships. The second is the adolescent hardships, rebellion, tragedy, and salvation of Kirk Franklin. The emotional upheaval of Kirk Franklin's early years propelled him into a period of extreme disobedience during his adolescence. Franklin, who was raised by his Aunt Gertrude after being abandoned by his biological parents, had strong feelings of rejection and inadequacy. A sense of alienation that showed up as defiant behavior was brought on by these unhealed traumas, as well as the difficulties of a learning disability that impeded his scholastic development. Franklin used drugs, alcohol, and smoking as a youngster to cope with the stress of his current life and the anguish of his past. The tragic death of a close friend in a bizarre shooting accident when Franklin was 15 years old marked a turning point in his life. The incident's circumstances are horrific, as Franklin lost a loved one to the unintentional firing of a handgun. He was shaken out of his rebellion and forced to face the frailty of life by this loss, which was a great blow. Franklin was profoundly affected by the tragedy's abruptness and senselessness, which led to serious reflection on his own life's direction and goals. Franklin was redirected toward the faith that had been a consistent, if tense, presence in his life after his friend's death, which acted as a wake-up call. Once a place of condemnation, the church turned into a haven where he could work through his sorrow and look for purpose. His relationship with music, which had always been a source of comfort, was renewed by this crucial event. By using gospel as a platform to communicate his hardships and goals, Franklin started to transform his suffering into his musical abilities. Despite its devastation, the tragedy served as a springboard for his spiritual rejuvenation and led him down a road of atonement and meaning. Being a father at the age of 17 presented Franklin with yet another formidable obstacle. Although it was a personal responsibility, his religious community closely watched and judged him as he reached this milestone. Teenage parenting was frequently seen as a moral failure in Fort Worth's conservative religious culture, especially for someone like Franklin, who had grown up in the church and was considered a bright young talent. His already turbulent adolescence was made even more stressful by the birth of his child, which forced him into a role for which he was unprepared. Franklin's adolescent hardships, disobedience, buddy loss, and early fatherhood were pivotal events that tried his fortitude but also paved the way for his salvation. His emphasis was redirected toward music, and his faith was rekindled by the tragedy that occurred when he was 15. Despite the first criticism from his community, his job as a father provided him motivation to keep going and changed his objectives. These encounters, together with his Aunt Gertrude's steadfast encouragement, enabled Franklin to discover his vocation in gospel music, where he could turn his suffering into meaning. The adolescent years of Kirk Franklin were a furnace of hardship characterized by disobedience, tragedy, and social condemnation. His use of drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes was a reflection of the mental upheaval caused by his abandonment as a child. Although losing a close friend at the age of 15 was a turning point that led him to turn to his faith, becoming a father at the age of 17 presented more duties as well as severe criticism from his church community, which made matters worse. However, these hardships served as the basis for Franklin's salvation rather than marking the conclusion of his tale. He became a gospel music star whose work continues to inspire millions of people by transforming his suffering into a potent force for good via faith, song, and perseverance. Franklin's adolescent journey serves as a powerful example of the strength of tenacity, demonstrating that optimism and purpose can triumph even in the face of hardship. The third is Kirk Franklin's near-death encounter, which was a life-changing event that demonstrated his faith and fortitude. With the success of albums like Kirk Franklin and The Family 1993 and Watching for 1996, Kirk Franklin was at the pinnacle of his early career when he was involved in a potentially fatal event during a performance in November 1996. Franklin may have died in an accident when he fell several feet from a stage while interacting with the audience. The fall's specifics are terrifying. The quick fall, the abrupt loss of balance, and the impact that left him shaken and hurt. Even though the specific injuries he received are not well known, the incident was serious enough to necessitate medical intervention and force Franklin to face the frailty of his life. Franklin was already dealing with a lot of personal and professional difficulties when this near-fatal event happened. He faced pressure to preserve his creative edge while adhering to the spiritual foundations of his art after becoming well known as a pioneer in gospel music. In addition to being a bodily shock, the fall served as a sobering reminder of his mortality, which made him stop and consider his goals in course. He was shaken out of the routine of his developing profession and forced to engage in a deeper level of contemplation by the urgency of the danger and his near-death experience. Franklin had to recuperate physically and emotionally in the immediate aftermath of the stage fall. Although there aren't many specifics regarding his injuries, the incident was severe enough to necessitate medical attention, most likely for treatment of bruising, potential fractures, or other trauma from the fall. The accident was a major setback for an artist who relied on physical presence to connect with audiences and whose performances were lively and energetic. Rest, medical attention, and a little break from his rigorous performing and recording schedule were probably all part of the recuperation process. Kirk Franklin underwent a significant spiritual metamorphosis as a result of his near-death encounter in November 1996. Franklin was already a devout guy, but his encounter with death strengthened his dedication to his beliefs. The incident acted as a wake-up call, highlighting the significance of his goal to use gospel music to preach hope and redemption. Franklin relied more on his faith in the face of such a terrifying event, seeing it as a divine intervention that spared his life for a higher good. This newfound spiritual resolve showed up in a number of ways. In the first place, it reinforced Franklin's commitment to music as a mission rather than merely a profession. With songs like Stomp and Revolution delivering messages of faith, resiliency, and collective upliftment, his latter work, including albums like The New Nation Project 1998, reflected a heightened sense of purpose. As he attempted to convey his message of survival and salvation to his audience, the near-death experience gave his music an even stronger feeling of urgency and genuineness. Kirk Franklin's life and career were significantly impacted by his near-death experience in November 1996, when he narrowly avoided death after a near-fatal fall from a stage. The accident, which happened during the height of his early career, put his physical and mental fortitude to the test and made him face his mortality and rethink his mission. While the immediate aftermath necessitated emotional and physical recuperation, the long-term effects strengthened his spiritual resolve and gave his music a more urgent and genuine feel. Franklin's ability to turn this trauma into a fresh dedication to his art and faith highlights his fortitude and commitment to his vocation. Franklin's survival of this near-death experience served as a tribute to the strength of faith and solidified his reputation as a gospel music superstar, whose music still inspires millions of people. Kirk Franklin's family arrangement is number 4, a reunion that is both bittersweet and its consequences. The absence of Kirk Franklin's biological parents throughout his early years had a significant impact on his identity and emotional terrain. After being abandoned at infancy, Franklin was taken in by his Aunt Gertrude, who fostered his musical abilities and gave him a caring environment. Franklin felt deeply rejected and unworthy, despite her caring, because he had no relationship with his biological parents. It was especially hurtful for him to not know who his father was, because it was a part of his past that was lost. Throughout his life, this absence stoked a sense of inquiry and longing that shaped his musical themes of loss and redemption. Kirk Franklin's life changed in 2023 when, while recording his album Father's Day, he found and reconnected with his biological father at the age of 53. Together with a documentary, the record was already a very personal endeavor that explored themes of faith, reconciliation, and fatherhood. Franklin discovered his father's identity throughout its creation, which was startling and incredibly significant. The discovery's conditions are noteworthy, despite their decades-long separation. Franklin's discovery that his father lived close by after years of ignorance highlighted how close their lives were, but it was a bittersweet reunion. Just as their relationship was starting, Franklin's father was nearing the end of his life due to a serious illness. This brief period of time gave their relationship a sense of urgency and sadness. The documentary Father's Day captures the emotional weight of this event, demonstrating Franklin's processing of the complicated sensations of meeting his father under such awful circumstances. As he struggled with the joy of finally knowing him and the grief of approaching loss, they interacted with a desire to comprehend one another. But Franklin's longing for a complete reconciliation was thwarted by the specter of death. A moving phase in Kirk Franklin's life is his journey of familial alienation, which included a heartbreaking reunion with his biological father at the age of 53 and a subsequent separation from his mother Deborah. A long-sought connection was made possible by the finding of his father at the establishment of Father's Day. However, his father's final sickness dampened its joy. A painful rift that highlighted the intricacies of family dynamics resulted from the subsequent confrontation with Deborah, which was motivated by years of unresolved anguish. Despite being difficult, these encounters strengthened Franklin's spiritual drive and enhanced his singing, solidifying his reputation as a gospel music legend. Franklin has demonstrated that even the most traumatic family separations may result in development and atonement by transforming personal grief into a worldwide message of hope via his openness and tenacity. The tale of Kirk Franklin's transformation from a disturbed young man in Fort Worth, Texas, to a world-renowned figure in gospel music is one of tenacity, faith, and creativity. After his parents abandoned him, Franklin was raised by his aunt Gertrude. He surmounted many obstacles in his personal and professional life to revolutionize gospel music. His groundbreaking ability to fuse pop, R&B, and hip-hop with traditional gospel has earned him 19 Grammy Prizes and left a lasting impression on the music business. Franklin has persevered in his faith despite facing personal challenges such as a near-death experience and familial separation, and he has inspired and uplifted millions of people through his songs. Kirk Franklin's legacy as a gospel music icon and a ray of light for people on their own paths to salvation endures, despite his ongoing development as a performer and person.